Hi there, everyone. I want to let you know that we're going to resume and wrap up our mini-series on Christian nationalism now, with just a few more podcasts lined up in the coming weeks. We hope you enjoyed the short break in the series to allow us to introduce two more incredible members of the Pillar faculty. We're so excited Drs. Parker and Keimer are on the team, and we hope you enjoyed getting to learn a bit more about them. We've got 5 podcasts left in our mini-series. Here today we'll introduce Dr. Mike Austin to you, and then we'll let you hear from Caleb Campbell. Both gentlemen have books on Christian nationalism coming out soon, so we thought interviewing them would be a great way to conclude the series. And both offer really neat ideas as to how to engage more positively with Christian nationalism, which is also really cool. And finally, the team will wrap up the series with our own podcast, looking back on the series and processing some things together. After that, of course, we'll return to the more typical Pillar podcast, but we trust you found this foray into an incredibly important current issue meaningful and helpful.
Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Our goal is to equip listeners to become better readers of Scripture and more skillful leaders in their local churches and ministries. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Seminary and sign up to receive exclusive content from Pillar's faculty, please visit pillarseminary.org.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pillar Podcast. We appreciate your presence here with us and your support along the way. We are continuing our mini-series on Christian nationalism here. That is, as if you've been following, you know, born out of my experience attending a conference in Phoenix late January. We've done an introductory podcast where we try to define the issue and then previewed some really fun conversations to come, and you've heard some of those conversations. This is another one such conversation here. We are really, really excited to have Dr. Mike Austin here with us. He was a workshop a panelist. What was your official title at this conference?
Yeah, I did one of the breakout workshop.
The breakout
things.
Session contributor.
Yeah, that's what it is. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So, Dr. Mike, thanks for being here. Really appreciate you sitting down with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. Looking forward to the discussion.
And with me as well, with us as well, Dr. Donnell Moore and Andrew Chris. Guys, thanks for being here as well.
Hi.
That is ridiculous. So, and we made Donnell mute because he has birds chirping in the background. So, rather than sound like a Disney film and Disney princess, we'll just keep him muted until he's ready to talk. So, Mike, what I'd like to do here first is read what I've been able to put together as your bio. It was really hard to do because your Amazon page says, my work is aimed at helping people cultivate character and contribute to the common good. And that's it. You are professor and coordinator for philosophy and religious studies at Eastern Kentucky University, where you've been since 2004. And it looks like, because I did finally dig up a CV somewhere on your website, that you have been the department chair for a while. What is coordinator? What does that mean? Program coordinator. Is that different?
Yes, it is. I was the chair, and then we merged with the history department, 3 or 4 years ago. So basically coordinator, I'm trying to make that job description smaller and smaller. But basically,
isn't it just one who coordinates?
Yeah, that's right.
A coordinator is one who...
Right. I don't even know
Andrew,
what.
do I hear birds in your background? Should you?
Oh, you want me to mute? Oh, okay. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
Mike shall increase, I shall decrease.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Like being a cat traffic controller.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, your academic interest is the larger field of philosophy, moral philosophy, analytic moral philosophy. The little that I understand of that from Wikipedia and from conversations with you and others. Your writing interests are really wide-ranging, though. So I think most of our conversation is going to flow out of your varied interests, and they're insane. So you have written on sports, fatherhood and parenting, guns, conspiracy theories, the virtue of humility, and coffee. What is the coffee one in there somewhere? Tell me about that real quick.
Yeah. So I was, in a way, it sounds better than it is, but like some of those, like like the coffee one, there was this series called Philosophy for Everyone. And so I had several on that where basically I edited or co-edited. So I would write a chapter and then you get like 15 other people to write a chapter, but it was trying to like books that like normal people. And by normal, I mean, like, that's a compliment, not like academics or philosophers would actually want to read it and benefit from it. So my chapter is actually on like on that. It's like an argument about God being the greatest conceivable being, like BEING, and then some kind of play on coffee beans. I actually wrote that chapter in a week because it was stuff I thought about already. Other chapters were longer and more torturous, but really those things are aimed at like showing people how just, regardless of their religious beliefs or lack of them, how philosophical thought can be relevant. And then some of the other ones he mentioned are more like sustained, in-depth, detailed writing. Some for other academics, which is torturous to write and torturous to read. And then the stuff that's a more general public audience. Actually, it's torturous to write in a different way because you have to unlearn all the academic bad habits of writing. And for me, it's like learning to write a little bit more from the heart while trying to get helpful content to people. So.
Man, well, that's awesome. I must say, after having poked my way through about half of your book that just came in the mail on humility, you're an incredible writer. So really fun to learn from. And let's talk sports here for a minute before we move any further. You've got like 4 or 5 on Olympics and different kinds of sport things. You're also a soccer coach. Your LinkedIn bio says that you're USSF coaching license certified. So what's the soccer? Give our audience the background there.
Yeah, so I grew up in Kansas City on the Kansas side, and I started playing when I started playing in the 1975 or 6, like in first grade. There was like we played. We went out to this farm that one of the coach owned, and so we played in a field like. Well, in Kansas, we called them cow patties. I don't know what you call them in Texas, but basically that was the field. It was brutal. So I always loved it. I didn't play it seriously much growing up. And then I coached a little bit, coached my daughters. And then our youngest daughter was the one that got into it seriously. And really that's when I fell in love with watching the game, not just playing it, and learned more about it, coached it. So I coached club and rec for a while, coached middle school for about 6 years, and then girls high school. Actually, last year I retired, so I need to update my LinkedIn bio. Oh no, I guess I'm still certified, but yeah, I loved that. It was so fun. I coached the high school team the last year, my daughter, so her senior year. I got her permission right before I applied, and she let me. So that was a great experience. But she was the youngest, and she left. And I loved coaching so much, and loved taking some of these ideas about Christian ideas, although it wasn't a Christian school, but just about community, like building character, building a little community, helping the girls learn. I mean, you learn some good stuff, but you have to be intentional as a coach. And man, I loved it. Plus it was like 20 to 25 girls I could still do my dad jokes with and, kind of torment them. But man, I mean, some of those girls, like I'm still in touch with them that are in college or even out of college. And that's that's really cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So, this is a question that I don't want you to focus on the wrong word. How the heck do you learn enough about all of these subjects to write credibly on all of them? And we're assuming credibility. So the credibility is not the question. It's the learning. How do you do that?
My guess is you have one of those time turners from Harry Potter, like Hermione. And you just pull it out, and you're
with us in a while, so he's getting all his words out.
Got a lot of backup material. Yeah,
yeah.
So that's what he's on Time Turner.
Yeah. So that's one thing. I should look into that, but it sounds like it'd probably be expensive. So some of them you don't have to learn a bunch about, right? So for example, the conspiracy theory book, that's an edited collection. I wrote a chapter, but my chapter's on how the virtue of humility relates to that. So that's easier to do. I had talked with a publisher. They wanted somebody to do a single authored work on conspiracy theories. And in that case was like, number one, I don't want to spend the time it would take to learn it. And two, yeah, I thought for that, it's more like equipping pastors or people who've got family members. So it was better to bring a bunch of philosophers, theologians, biblical studies, communications, different people. So in that way, the edited ones, you don't have to be an expert in this or learn as much. But like the gun book, I mean, I had to like read a bunch of stuff for a couple of years. And I'm fortunate that my job as a professor, I mean, I have a heavy teaching load, but I'm pretty in my office. I don't waste a lot of time, except for, on podcasts. That's a joke. But so I work pretty hard at like reading, and the humility thing, and virtue, that's stuff that's been an interest of mine, man, for 15 or 20 years. So you have that base of knowledge. But yeah, it's true. I mean, some people do write stuff. I'm like, how can you know that much about everything? And I'm fortunate enough that if I write a book that I write on it, then I've done a lot of reading and research and gone through the blood, sweat, and tears of figuring out what I think.
Incredible.
But there's always more to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. That's inspiring and a little exhausting to think about what sort of focus it must take. But appreciate your work. Appreciate your service to the church and to so many others with this sort of, this is really good formative stuff here.
It's really important. I appreciate that. At the end of the day, it's a couple things apart from teaching, but the writing for academics is that showing that you can come into the realm of high level academic philosophy and make important arguments, either grounded in sort of Christian views about human nature and life and ethics and flourishing, or just actually making the case that some of those through the humility books, like the academic ones, like this is a virtue. Like you can make an argument that's a virtue, and that it fits well within the Christian sort of perspective. Anyway, and then the other ones are aimed at let's interact with other people who actually still read books and want to think about stuff, and let's try to discover some stuff together. So.
Yep. Well, that's what we're going to do here. We're going to see what we can learn from you. So let's get to it. You have mentioned in conversation, and then in your writing, you cite him a couple times right out of the gate, that Dallas Willard was an important influence on your thinking. Can you just briefly, I think it'll help us understand some of your background with Biola and Willard as an important influence. Just kind of give us a little bit there before we move.
Yeah. So it was, I had thought about pursuing, I was working in ministry at the time, thought about pursuing like a philosophy degree, and a lot of things were leading that way. And then it was Willard's book, The Spirit of the Disciplines, which is basically a theology of the spiritual disciplines. Mm-hmm. There's this line later in the book that's like, talks about, living your life as Jesus would if he were you. All right. So that all that matters. And then he listed off different careers, like electrician. One of them was, professor, not philosophy professor, but professor. And it really was like one of those stereotypical lightning bolt moments. Like that's what I want to do. I thought I'm going to do that. I mean, now of course it took a while to like finalize the decision, but my mind was made up then. So there's that. And I came into the spiritual formation literature through Willard, through Richard Foster and Henry Nouwen a little bit. But then like getting my master's at Biola at Talbot School of Theology. Two of the professors had studied under Willard. And so there was that influence. A lot of my colleagues, like friends and fellow philosophers in the Christian philosophy world, have studied under him. And just his books, reading his books have really shaped my view of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And so there's this video series called Remembering Dallas. It's through the I can't say this right. I don't speak Latin. Conversatio Divina. And if I butchered that, that's okay, right? Because I'm humble. But they've got these videos, and there's a video there, someone that J.P. Moreland talks about, like Dallas gave this framework for Christianity, spiritual formation, character growth, but there are a ton of gaps in it because it's a big question, and he left us work to do. And I look at a lot of my work, especially with humility, is like, okay, here's some gaps I can fill. There's just... He does a good job of critiquing both the right and the left of the church in America, kind of what we get right, what we get wrong, and where we can go from there. And it just shaped so much of my life. Yeah.
So this feels appropriate given Willard and his influence. Your book is Humility, which we'll get to in a minute, really engages helpfully with the communal side of this. We need others to be formed. And you mentioned that you're you were a part of a church plant, and
Yeah.
you found kind of a new lease on Christian life in it. Can you tell us a little about your church context too before we?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been, we've had some good church experiences, so I'm not throwing them all under the bus, but some of them I am. But man, I mean, it was difficult moving. So I grew up in Kansas City, then grad school or did some ministry, then grad school in California, Boulder, Colorado, and then to come to Kentucky, which is kind of the upper edge of the buckle of the Bible Belt. It was culture shock. And so we didn't know anything, and going to churches and being yelled at without realizing it, not doing that. But I got so tired of going to church and being angry, like either something said in the sermon or that the way people acted or that just this weird thing. And I heard for decades, about community, do life together, all this sort of, especially in evangelical Christianity, all those little slogans but it was just, it didn't happen to the extent that I've experienced it with this church. And it's not perfect, of course. We're still going, it still exists. We're still, so that's good.
Nice.
Don't have to say, well, the church died. And some of the churches we were a part of here that we felt were healthier and more in line with kind of that communal aspect, they died out. So this one it's going strong. But yeah, the first thing we did as a church plant group was read Bonhoeffer's book, Life Together. So that's indicative of kind of the philosophy of ministry and and physically proximate. So I live my wife and I moved to downtown Richmond, which there is a downtown. It's a small town. I realize that small towns are just like big cities, just everything's at scale. Right. So, so the 1.5 mile move was like two very different worlds in the small town I'm in. But our pastor, one of them lives across the corner. Other people live within some directly across the street. So I mentioned this, I think, in the book some, but the physical proximity makes a difference. And then there's just because of the heart of the pastors and the founding team, there's sort of this culture of the church of community and of actual relationships. It's just, it's healthy. And I think I don't like it. A part of me has resisted that over the years. When I first, this was a different church, realized, my spiritual health depends on other people. I didn't want that. I want it to be like me, my wife, maybe some close friends, and Jesus, but it's just not built that way, So that's still been a really rich experience for us, and to be able to receive and give in that community, I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Want to let you know that if you are interested in studying with us at Pillar for the fall 2024 semester, we're still accepting applications all the way up to July 29th of 2024. So you can find out more information about the application process and see the application itself at pillarseminary.org/apply. If you have any questions, email us at admissions@pillarseminary.org, and we'll get all your questions answered and help you fill out that application and get it submitted. Man, that's cool. Yeah, thanks for some of that background. I think it'll help make some sense of where we go, in addition, of course, to your academic interest. I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to point to two books that we've alluded to, but I want to just be very clear and give you a chance to comment briefly a little about them before we get to humility.
Okay.
God and Guns in America is this book, and you describe, or it's described on the back as a non-pacifist perspective, which I guess, does that just mean you're not wanting to do away with everything, but work with the reality that we live in? Is that what that means?
Yeah, and it's basically, so there's some people in the sort of the Christian gun ethics debate who are absolute pacifists. So I think of Shane Claiborne's an example of that. Yeah. Then you've got people who are just full speed ahead. The Second Amendment and the Constitution, they're not the Bible, but they're about as close as you can get without being the Bible, and I'm not there either. Really, as I read and researched and read scripture with these questions in mind, I tell people I'm as close to being a pacifist as you can be without actually being one. And maybe I'll take that final small step. But I think what I wanted to do is say, look, to send the signal that it's not from pacifism. The arguments in the book aren't from a pacifist perspective. They're not from a just war perspective either. I call it peacemaking, where the burden though, which a lot of people we don't live it out in practice, is if violence is justified, then you've got a heavy burden to make the case for that. And our default as Christians has to be, if we're not pacifists, it still has to be peace and peacemaking. And I think as American Christians, a lot of us, we're part of an empire, right? I mean, we've got military around the world. And so I want the burden of proof to be there. And so my position in the book is kind of middle of the road. I'm like, basically the one sentence thesis is that we can reduce gun violence in America while protecting the rights of responsible gun owners, and Christians, especially given our faith, we ought to be on the front of that.
Oh man. All right. So that is on sale on Amazon. You can find that, God's Guns in America. And it looks really fascinating. It's on a pile for me that I haven't climbed out from under yet, but I'll get to it. And it is one of these kind of anxiety inducing conversations. So I appreciate you having waded into it on behalf of so many, that this really does touch a lot more closely than some other issues. So the next one we talked about, you edited, and we have a former board member, Drew Johnson, who was a contributor to this as well. QAnon Chaos and the Cross. This is Christianity and Conspiracy Theories. And I guess if you only edited and didn't learn a ton, I sense you're kind of downplaying it some. I am curious just to hear, and I think maybe this will lead into the Christian nationalist. What is it about us as evangelicals with evangelical baggage that seems to make us more prone to conspiracy theories or traffic in them more readily? And then how do we engage with people like that? What do we do with them?
Yeah, I think there are some things. And so one nice thing about co-editing that book is I learned a lot from the contributors. Some of the stuff they said I knew and believed, some of the stuff I disagreed with. But yeah, I mean, I think especially in evangelicalism, there is and still is an anti-intellectual bent, that runs through that Christian tradition. And I mean, it's an American thing too, right? We're kind of suspicious. Even saying someone that says I'm an intellectual, we think, well, that's weird. What's your problem? You think you're better than me? I mean, that kind of stuff. But it's just that's part of it. I mean, if you think back to there's some parallel tracks. If you think back to like the early 70s and 80s with the end time stuff, sort of, are fascinating. When I was a senior at Kansas State University in 1991, when the first invasion of Iraq didn't take, or Kuwait conflict that took, didn't take long, but man, the flood of books about the end times, right? We're just fascinated with that stuff. And those books sell better than books about humility, whatever that tells you. But yeah, so I think that we have that, we have also the negative, I guess, would be, we just don't want to think about things deeply. Like slogans do a lot of work in America and in the church. And slogans, sometimes they reflect truth, sometimes they distort it. That's a problem. And I don't mean this I think honestly, some of the young earth creationist stuff can lead to this because there's a suspicion. Well, all those scientists that study this for, hundreds of years, they're just wrong. They just believe that because they don't want to follow Jesus. Well, okay, yeah, that kind of suspicion is unwarranted and of what the work people do. So there's a suspicion of experts that runs. And look, we shouldn't just entrust experts no matter what. But I mentioned this in my chapter of the conspiracy theory book on humility. If all the ways that I either think there's a conspiracy or disagree with the expert consensus, if in case after case after case in my own life, when I do that, it also fits into what I already believe about God, politics, the war, that's like a red flag. So I'm concerned about those things. And but on the positive side, where maybe it's not blameworthy, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, your question is, look, we believe, evangelicals, most of us at least, in like unseen forces, right? In angels, demons, souls, God, things, the story behind the story. And maybe that makes us more susceptible to the conspiracy theory stuff. But man, we've got to stop being immune to evidence or ignoring it. That's troubling and undermines our credibility.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. So I think, two kind of questions, one for you, Mike, and then one for Dr. Moore, is can we define what we mean when we're talking about conspiracy theory real quick? Just I mean, I'm asking for a friend out there who's listening.
Yeah.
You know?
Good. Yeah. The way we normally use it is like, if we say conspiracy theory, we mean false or something outlandish. But I want a more new conspiracies happen. So Watergate happened, right? There was a conspiracy among the soldiers after Jesus died on the cross in Scripture to say the disciples came and stole the body, right? To hide what really happened. So conspiracy theory, it's like, it's a group of people for some purpose, right? This is the problem when you become in your 50s, things start disappearing. But basically, there's some hidden explanation that's the real truth and that other people don't see. So it's a theory about some event or some person that says what's really going on isn't what as it appears, right? There's some kind of group of people working behind the scenes for some purpose, whether it's the deep state or
demons.
Demons, the Democratic / Hollywood / media, right? Sex trafficking, pedophile group with the tunnels under the White House, whatever it is, right? So,
yeah. So it does seem really, when we talk about it like this, it does feel really honest for people of my community, the evangelical community, to I'll call it fall prey to a conspiracy theory, but it just fits in naturally with kind of the way that we maybe think about the world and perceive the world. I was curious for Dr. Moore to weigh in on if this is something, because Dr. Moore's background is primarily in the Black church in North America, and if this is something that he sees as well in the Black church, the affinity for maybe conspiratorial kind of thinking. I don't know, Dr. Moore, do you have any thoughts on that? And you're muted.
Not so much. The Black church is afraid of God. They are afraid of going to hell. And so they grew up on fire and brimstone. And so that's why it's very difficult for conspiracy theories to invade the African American community and take root. It's because their fear of God and their weddedness to the church will kick it out. Yeah. And
nice.
By the way,
appreciate that.
a third of my time in ministry has been in the white church. Don't forget.
Right. That's true.
Rural Ottawa, Kansas.
Oh, yeah. My dad worked at Ottawa University for a while back in the day. That's interesting.
Yeah, I was the pastor of First Church, Ottawa, United Methodist.
Okay.
Muted, Dan.
Sorry. Yep. Okay. That's a good segue into the next part of the conversation here. Your book on humility, which just came out. And like I said, I'm halfway through it. It is fantastic. And I was just telling a pastor buddy that I was meeting with earlier, I wouldn't have read this if it weren't for this podcast series and me having met you. And I would have read it after all my other work was done. But it is really neat how the Lord has kind of brought this to my attention. I need this book, and I've felt the Lord work through it already in me. Can you talk just about your academic work there, humility and human flourishing, and then how that feeds into this? Because you really do talk about flourishing a lot and God's design on things through this formation of character. But
Yeah, I thought this book, the one that you just held up, I thought it would basically be kind of a similar to the academic book, but just translated, so to speak, into accessible and interesting language. But as I sat down and wrote the book, the current humility book, that's for a more general audience, it's more like it provided the foundation, but there's not as much of like, it's not a chapter for chapter thing. There's a bunch of stuff I talk about in the academic book. But I think the advantage of the academic book for me of writing that was, one, to try to make the case that it's a virtue and that it's important for our flourishing from a Christian perspective, interacting with both Christian and non-Christian thinkers. And like reading widely, I had some funding, a grant. And so I had some sabbatical time to work on it, and then just kept digging away at it. So all that hard work. So it's basically that helped me understand humility in deeper ways, but then to write this and gave me deep convictions about the importance of the virtue. So I was able to interact with people who are skeptical that humility is a virtue, whether, so historically David Hume or Friedrich Nietzsche, and then contemporary philosophers and say, actually, no, you can make solid arguments that, yeah, this is a vital virtue for human beings, Christian or not. Because, there are forms of humility, obviously, that just as for human beings that don't depend on particularly Christian commitments. So then the humility book was like, what is this? It really was just some of the stuff I've been thinking about since I was not far out of college, just in terms of like culture war things and those sorts of issues. So the humility book with Oxford was more like the academic foundation, intellectual foundation. And then the book that you're reading is like, okay, let's take this into the world, into our lives, into this moment for American Christians. What do we need to do? What's going on here? How have we lost this virtue, its importance, and what can we do to cultivate it in our lives, in our churches, in our communities, in our homes, in our friendships? Because it's vital. I mean, when you start reading and thinking about humility, we cannot be a part of building God's kingdom and partnership with Jesus and serving the world and serving the church if we're not humble. The problems we see, so many of them are failures of humility and exemplifying pride.
Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, that's maybe why it was so easy to be convicted by this. Just so many of my troubles that I have found myself in are from pride and arrogance and lack of humility. So yeah, it is. Conviction is never far away with something like this. For the interest of time, yours and also where we are in the podcast right now, let me just read the subtitle and then let you kind of vamp on this theme here. Rediscovering the Way of Love and Life in Christ is the subtitle. And you deal in the chapters that I've read so far, and it looks like you continue with this idea of being on the way with Jesus as very wisdom path. You mentioned this too, but can you get at the gist of the book, defining humility and love, and then this way of Jesus that you're describing? Then, please.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot more to being a follower of Jesus than humility and love, but they're at the center of it for sure. And I think most Christians would agree with that, at least in theory. And practice a lot harder. Actually, Pascal, French Christian philosopher in the 1600s, said it's hard to speak humbly of humility, right? And what he meant, and I take that to heart, it's like there's something unhumble about writing a book about humility in a certain way, or at least there are challenges to it. Like, this is the best book on humility. People need to know what I have to say about humility, But the way, I love that imagery, and in the book of Acts, they referred to followers of Jesus as followers of the way, kind of the capital W, and the way that the people in the New Testament talk about, walking in the way of Jesus, following in his steps, all those things. I love that image and metaphor because there is a way to go, right? Jesus is the way. There's that too. And there are other paths, other ways that can, lead us off of that path. And so I love that idea. And it's the idea that it's lifelong. It's that Eugene Peterson book, the line he actually took from Nietzsche, it's a long obedience in the same direction. So it's all those things are in it. And so I work with that. It's a metaphor in a way, but it's also just a way of conceiving of the Christian life. And so love and humility are central to that. And I think we've lost it. I know, and it's easy to do in our personal lives, even if you're, even mature followers of Jesus, right? By we, I mean the royal we. I'm not. You should have to ask my wife if I'm a mature follower of Jesus. She would be the best judge. But even if we are like more mature Christians, they or we, it's easy to lose those things. And because we're still, we're on this side of our completion or perfection in Christ, we're going to struggle. But for me, that follows throughout the book, and love is central to the way. So love is, broadly speaking, if I have the virtue of love, I'm disposed or I'm inclined to do what I can for the good of others, like the true good of other people. That's a Willard definition, but I think it's a Bible definition, right? That's what Jesus did for us, right? Yeah. And so, which means, that it may not be what they think is good for them, right? But with respecting their will, which is a sacred thing, to respect the will of other human beings, not to coerce them, I try to love them. And humility is, it seems to me, is almost in some ways a precondition for love, because they're so closely tied together. Love is doing what's good for others, or being disposed to do that as I have opportunity. Humility is a sort of a self-lowering, other-centeredness, is like a quick way to put it. Like, I put others' interests ahead of my own. Not always, right? I mean, there are times, so it's not being a doormat. It's not, we do that recognizing our own dignity as image bearers of God. But I put the truth, and that may mean, that people object to humility with the way it's been abused, right? So, like, even thinking of the Black church and the transatlantic slave trade and that stuff, telling the slaves, be humble. This is God's place for you. They edited out the slave version of the Bible, edited out all the stuff that would have caused, make the slaves realize God doesn't want this. So Martin Luther King talks about this. I think Frederick Douglass did too, about, and putting the way that you can humbly put the interests of others ahead of yourself is to challenge oppressors and realize it's not just bad for the oppressed, but it's bad for the oppressor to oppress others. They're not flourishing. So kind of getting down the path. But then I talk about being people of the way, having those virtues, practices of the way, different spiritual practices that can help us cultivate humility. And it's not like a formula, but it's basically one metaphor someone gave, I think it was Frederick Buechner, of fasting or community or solitude or prayer. Those are practices that can draw us closer to God, but they're ways of opening the windows of our life, so to speak, and that grace can come in. So it's not a guarantee. God is still up to God, but I'm at least opening parts of my life through those practices for the Spirit to work. And it's often going to, especially humility, it's often going to be through other Christians, because being in community with them, that's where you have to I've got to put that guy's interests ahead of mine at church who annoys me, or who always wears that Bengals jersey and I'm a Chiefs fan. So actually that's more temptation to pride. But anyway, or think about conspiracy theories. Think about the guy in your church that's just all in on some conspiracy theory and he's always wanting to talk about it. Yeah, humility would be for someone like me who's skeptical to be like, I'm not talking about the guy on Twitter or Facebook, but I mean, the guy who I'm in church with, I'm going to engage that guy and love that guy and be humble and not just dismiss him as he just buys that stuff, whatever. I don't want to talk to him. It's like, no, humbly engage him and love him. And then I think the last part of the book is about, persevering on the way. Yeah. And that's look, I'm 54. I mean, I came to Christ at 17. So whatever that is, 37 years. And there are never times where I've just said, forget it. But there are times where it's like, even in recent years, in your 50s, someone told me this and they were right. When I got there, you start thinking about death more. And I'm like, do I really believe this? Like, am I just going to die and rot in the ground, or is it worth staying on this way? And is it really true? I think it is. The stuff that I think I've got a lot more beliefs and opinions, but there are a lot fewer convictions, but I think that's healthy later in life, because the convictions I have go all the way down. And those are stuff about humility and love. I'll go to the mat for those things. And there's something, and so I can't get away from my deep conviction that God is at his essence love, and that as we're recording this, it's Maundy Thursday, that Jesus really did rise from the dead. I mean, I can't escape those things. And so all the other stuff, the questions, the wondering, the why is my life not going the way I wanted it to go, in certain ways, and other ways it is. That's at the end of the day. So that's the theme that carries through the book. What does it mean to be a follower of the way?
Yep. Okay, Mike, this is, we could talk for hours. We are going to try to talk for a little more time, but we should probably stop here, wrap things up, put a bow on it for the first part of this conversation. When we pick back up, I want to talk about your forthcoming work on American Christian nationalism. And I'm really curious. I know we all are here to hear about what the train of thought is that flows out of the humility book into this next project. So, guys, thanks for being here with us. Mike, thanks for your time for this episode, and we'll pick up here next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You may or may not know that we exist entirely from two different revenue streams. One is tuition revenue, and the other is from donations from supporters, generous supporters like many of you. We could not do what we do, including this podcast, which is a ministry of Pillar Seminary, without your generous support. We would ask you to prayerfully consider, if you haven't already, joining us, partnering with us, and supporting the work and the ministry that we do here in all of its forms at Pillar Seminary. You can find out more, and you can go online to give at pillarseminary.org/give.
Thanks for listening to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Please visit us on the web at pillarseminary.org to find out more about our academic degree programs and non-credit learning opportunities. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and podcasting platforms. Thanks again for listening.